So hey guys, welcome to Appalachia's Homestead. Welcome back to the channel. Hope you are doing well out there. Hope you are warm and safe. We are a balmy 18 degrees on this Saturday afternoon. We are ready to get out of this weather. Holy moly, but it's not going to be for another 2 days that we do. So I thought this would be a wonderful opportunity for me to read something to you. If this bores you to death, I'm sorry, but I think it's pretty meaningful. My grandmother, she's my Nana, she's always been my Nana, wrote you guys a letter. She really, really did. And I told you a couple weeks ago that I was, going to read it to you, and I thought today would be a wonderful opportunity to kind of get out of the elements for a few minutes and to share this with you. My Nana is 87 years old, and she was born in 1936, so she is a Great Depression era baby, if you will. True product of the beautiful Appalachian region. All of our family is. And so I thought this would be a great time to share this with you. I actually asked her to write down a couple of bullet points on things that she experienced in her life or ways to save money. And, I just talked to her about it. She's like, well, sure. Well, she ended up writing you actually 2 letters. So I'm going to read them to you. And I think you're going to find it very special. She sat down at the table. She's had some health struggles this past year. So this is a gem for me. So I hope you enjoy it. And she literally wanted to share these things with you about her life as a child and some of the things that she learned. And guys, she just loves y'all. So let's just go with it, okay? All right, so I'm going to do my best to read this as best I can, okay? Are you ready? Let's do it. When I was a child, I lived with my grandmother, and the house had no running water inside. We had no electricity. My mother would get up at 5 a.m. every morning to build a fire in the house to get the house warm. Before we would go off to school, my grandmother would get up to put the wood into the kitchen stove again so that we could bake biscuits. If we had something wrinkled that needed to be pressed, we had to have the kitchen stove heated up so that we could get the iron out and make it hot so that we could press our clothes down. As for our water, we had a cistern that we would lower with a bucket to get our water. We would get our drinking water, and we would also take a bath from rainwater that we would catch in a barrel. The kids had to take a bath one after another to wash their bodies and their hair in a galvanized tub, and we all used the same bath water. My mom worked at a mill, and she told my granny one day to get us up very early so that we could go blackberry picking. She loves to tell this story. The kids would come home absolutely eaten up with chiggers. Granny would use the berries to make jelly. She also milked the cow and gave me enough milk to make cottage cheese. I loved cottage cheese. The best meal I ever had as a child was homemade cottage cheese and white beans. We also planted a garden which consisted of potatoes, okra, tomatoes, and beans. We had to hoe the weeds ourselves so that the vegetables would grow. When the vegetables were ready to pick, my mother told us to get a big pan and go picking. Then we had to wash and peel everything for Granny to can them. When we went to school, we walked on a gravel road, and oftentimes we went barefoot to school. We always carried our lunch to school. Our clothes were secondhand or were made by a local lady who sewed for a living. As I got out of school and started making some money, I went to the bank and I saved half of my money so I wouldn't spend it all. When I got married, we didn't want to pay rent, so my own father helped build us a little 4-room house. There we had 2 children. We paid the little house off, bought a little bit of land, and built a bigger home and saved enough to pay it off. I live in this house to this day. I retired when I was 54 years old. My husband retired when he was 57. Young people, you have to start out somewhere and start out poorly to make something of yourself. My husband is now deceased, but I live comfortably in the same house because of all of the work and money that we saved. You can do it. Okay, so she wrote that first little bit, and then she came back with a second letter. This is her handwriting, okay? When I was in the 1st grade, we were allowed to chew gum. but there was no bubble gum around. One day they allowed bubble gum to be chewed in class, and I got my first piece, as it was obviously very limited. I chewed it all day long. At night, I was afraid I would never get another piece, so I dropped it in a little glass of water until morning. Then I would chew on it again. I did this until the bubble gum turned white. I was so afraid I would never see a piece of bubble gum again. When I started cooking for my family, this is where I learned to use a lot of leftovers. I would warm them up for the next night or the next day, and I would make a new dish out of anything and everything that I saved. I put a container in my freezer every night, and I would freeze anything that we didn't eat so I could make my own soups. I got the container half full, and I would add tomatoes, and that is how I learned to make my own style of vegetable soup. When I went to work every day, I either took a plain cheese sandwich or 1 can of soup. Sometimes I would put a can of soup in my locker. On Mondays, my husband would give me $1. I would use the soup or the cheese sandwich, and my goal was every Friday I would turn back around and give my husband the $1 back, and then we would save that $1. That is how we saved money. Because I worked, sometimes it took extra money to buy clothes because they were so expensive. I learned to use seasonal colors and patterns, and I had a very special friend that would help me make clothes, and it would save me a lot of money. Certain times I would buy the same shoes but in 3 different colors. I would go for 10 years using the same shoes. I only had 3 pairs of shoes, and I would wear them over and over, and I made it to 10 years. This is how I learned another way to save money, because I would stretch everything. Once I retired, I didn't really focus on any hobbies but other than taking care of my home and my husband. He was a big hunter and fisherman, and oftentimes I would cook much of what he would hunt and the things that he loved as well. I would make homemade cakes and pies and all kinds of dishes, and this is how I learned again as an adult I could save money. I think it's important, guys, that we take the time to talk to our older generations. I know that a lot of times they become fewer and farther between because as we continue to age, obviously they continue to age. And I'm very fortunate to still have my Nana, and she can still openly talk about all of these things. I've shared some of these little tips with you, especially about like magic soup and different things like that. But here's the thing, we think we have it really hard these days, and a lot of people really, really do. But if we reflect back on the life of our grandparents, we're going to find out really quick that oftentimes their lives were much harder than anything that we're enduring right now. That doesn't mean that times aren't going to get harder, because if we look around, we know that it probably is. So we need to pull from past generations, pull from the things that they did. They lived very modestly. 3 pairs of shoes. Rotate them until you can't rotate them anymore. They saved everything. They didn't waste anything. They stretched their meals. A lot of times when I talk to my Nana, and she talks about either being a young adult or even a child, and she would talk about her grandmother, which is my great-grandmother, you will find out that meals were very, very simple, stupid. Breakfast consisted of biscuits. Okay? And if you had jelly or jam to go with it, that was a bonus. My Nana often tells about, she lived with her parents and her grandparents. So the grandmother at the time was the homekeeper. She would cook something for breakfast, and then she would cook 1 meal that would have to last them for lunch and dinner. This is how a lot of Appalachian folks made it. They cooked 1 major meal, and they would stretch it as far as they could. A lot of times, and I've said this in the past, my Nana will talk about, they would have 2 dishes. They would have cottage cheese and beans. They would have corn and beans. They would have potatoes and corn. They did not eat a lot of meat, not because they didn't like it. If they had sausage, they would have sausage for breakfast with their biscuits. But as far as lunch and dinner goes, it was consistent of vegetables and cornbread. If they had a dessert, oftentimes my Nana will tell you that it was oatmeal with a little bit of sugar. They were allowed to have 1 cup of sugar per week to make a sweet treat, be it a cake or some cookies. And a lot of times they would want to wait till the end of the week, because what if the preacher came for Sunday dinner? Sunday dinner always had a meat. They would either have a chicken or they would go and get a rabbit. That was pretty much it. Beef was not something they had in the house. They had sausage, not bacon. They would take the chicken, and my Nana talks about how, I've got that recorded as well, how they would go out and they would wring the chicken's neck, and she would have to singe all the feathers off and pluck the chicken and do all of these things to help her grandfather. They would bring it in and they would cook the chicken on Sundays because the preacher might come for supper. That was pretty common. She often talks about if it was really a tough time, she would watch her grandfather get his rifle and he would head out and he would bring in a rabbit. He would slam it down and she would watch my grandmother, my great-great-grandmother, her grandmother, basically skin the rabbit and cook it. This is how they lived. We're so spoiled these days. Even in tough times, we have so many options in terms of foods and different things that we do that it's hard for a lot of people at times to relate to this sort of living. But this is where we are being pushed back to in a lot of ways. And I really want to share these moments with you, and I like to relish in them and talk to my Nana and talk to you guys about them, because this is the attitude and the lifestyle that's going to make it. And we can't look at it as being poor. We can look at it as being challenged. And I often like to say, this is why I tell you to connect as much as you can with your grandparents, your ancestors, and look at the things and the lives that they did. Look at what they farmed. In my case, I can go to Cherokee County, North Carolina, or down here to Telco Plains and look at all the things that they did. They milked a cow. They milked a goat. They would have to get the bucket to get their water. They were very basic in their meals. A lot of these people lived to be in their 80s and 90s as well. Even though they ate sausage, which everybody tries to tell you is so bad for you, and everybody tries to tell you that butter is so bad for you. Absolutely false, not true. You know as well as I do that the cleaner that we can eat and the closer that we can get to making our own products, the better we're going to be. You don't have to be perfect. It's tough. I get that. But we have to change our attitude and our mindset. Look at this as living rich, because you're surviving through a hard time just as your grandparents did. My Nana, like I said, was born in 1936. She was born to a 16-year-old mother in a log cabin in deep West Knoxville when West Knoxville was nothing. Okay, if you know where Fox Road is off of Kingston Pike, if you're in the Knoxville area, kind of sort of near where the lake kind of is back in there in them woods, that is where my Nana was born. And they were all so poor, but yet look at all the things that they could do and the appropriate attitude that they had in terms of appreciating, even when it came down to just a stick of bubble gum. So I hope that you reflect upon your ancestors and your grandparents and the life that they live. And I hope that you are sharing it every single day as much as you can, be it by stories, reminders, or getting in the kitchen and making biscuits. You can make biscuits. You can do a lot of these things. It is an adjustment. And yes, we should live. Yes, we should try to strive to have good times and enjoy things. But what are we truly enjoying anymore? When you can honestly sit back and say the joy of your childhood was when you could chew a stick of bubble gum. Compare that to what we are seeing now with first graders walking around with iPhones and Stanley Cups. And then we question why maybe some of us have lost our ways. That's not judgment, that's fact. This country's going to go through a tough time again. And the best way that we know to pull together and through it is not only by daily prayer, but this is why for so many years I have reminded you and shared with you and pressed you to learn the way of your ancestors. Because when you see the joy that they could find in such simple things, I am confident we could find them again. You will find them. And we're all going to be better for it. Like, subscribe, and share. Thank you, Nana, for sharing this. I know you're going to watch this video. We love you to bits. And we appreciate you taking the time to help us younger folks out. Keep praying for us younger folks, Nana. We need your strength. Guys, appreciate you being here. Stay warm out there. I'm going to go milk a goat. right now. Like, subscribe, and share. Stay warm, stay well, stay safe. Keep praying. Keep praying for this nation. We will get through it. Guys, God bless, Godspeed, and we will see you on the next video.